Internet, and welcome to the Collective Arcana. We're a channel all about tabletop gaming, and today I want to talk to you about the Gamemastery Guide for Pathfinder 2nd Edition. The Gamemastery Guide is really takes up about 5 major sections, and I just kind of want to go through those in the order of the book, just to add a little structure to the video and really contain myself on the tangents I get on. So the first section is Gamemastery Basics. This is really pretty much just an extension of the Gamemastery chapter in the core rulebook. It's going to provide additional information, tips, and guidelines for running the game and all modes of play. It's a great resource, especially if you're new to the game, and even if you aren't new to the game, there's going to be a lot in there for you to just refresh on, or maybe some perspective or some ideas that maybe you're not the most proficient with. For example, I'm not terribly good at the exploration aspect of the game all the time. I tend to neglect traps and puzzles, and a lot of that's because a lot of my players have said they don't enjoy those aspects of the game quite as much, but it's no excuse not to have any of it, so it was nice for me to refresh on some of those as well. The second section is all about tools. So this section is going to give you some information and some tools to homebrew items or creatures or hazards. It's going to give you some guidelines on creating cities, settlements, countries, worlds, planes of existence, everything. It's going to really be a great resource for anyone who wants to create a world from the ground up, or maybe flesh out a homebrew setting, or even a core setting if you either don't have any books that deep dive into the Galarian setting, certain cities. You might have enough information to fill out one of those settlement charts and make up whatever you don't know for sure. It's always, even when you're playing in Galarian, it's still your world. One of the most exciting things in that chapter might be the new rules for creating sentient items, as well as cursed objects, relics, and other very powerful artifacts. The relics especially are items that sort of grow with your character and might gain new bonuses or abilities based on either amount of time played or other actions that you take with them. Almost like an achievement sort of system where, do XYZ and unlock, ABC. It's pretty exciting, pretty cool. It's something that I've been using in my home games for a long time. I don't think it was something I came up with on my own even then. I'm sure I saw it in some 3.0 or 3.5 supplement, some kind of book or something, but I cannot remember the origin of that. But it was something that I really liked because I enjoy being able to give my characters items that both hook them into the world and make them sort of give them like an affirmation of either I'm doing something that is impacting the world, or I'm doing something right in the way that I'm playing my character for whatever reason or in whatever way. I also like it because, coming from a lot of video games and even some tabletop RPGs, sometimes your character will feel like the items or the gear they have is very important, maybe sometimes even more important than some other aspects of their character. So I like the idea of being able to give an item to a character that is powerful enough that gives them some interesting new abilities, or but at the same time doesn't feel like I'm good because of this item. Rather, this item and I are good together, and I really like that angle when you're giving out a powerful magic item. The other thing that's really cool about it is you can give characters an item that will, just the fact that it scales with them is very, very fun, because it means that the characters, A, won't have to replace weapons as often, and B, may be reluctant to replace a weapon they like just because something a little more powerful comes along. They might hold on to it and say, that new axe is really cool, but this sword, I don't know what this sword could do in a couple levels. It might, I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to keep seeing what it's about. So, it can make them feel a little more attached to a weapon or item than just getting the next best thing that drops or that they find in town. In addition to those tools, you're also going to find big lists of loot items, primarily being gems and art objects. These can help fill out a loot table and really give a different feel to the type of treasure. Sometimes it's strange. Sometimes you want to reward the party with something monetary, but it seems odd to have a bunch of gnolls who don't trade with any settlements to be obsessed with gold and coins of the realm when they could just trade, nice ivory statues or, emerald gems, things that they might be able to get more use out of bartering in their monstrous tribal situation. And finally, something that's really cool in there is there's a list of several diseases and drugs and the addictive repercussions of using them. Something that may not come up in every campaign, the drug use, but the afflictions, the diseases almost certainly are useful to every game. And, the addiction mechanics, if your table's comfortable with it, can be really interesting. And even if you don't intend for your players to use it, it can really make a crime organization or a nefarious alchemist feel a lot more dastardly when you start seeing the effects that their creations and what they're peddling has on the community, when you start to see them suffering from those sort of afflictions. So it's pretty fun, even if you don't intend to, or even if you don't have players that intend to go down that path. The next system is a group of subsystems, and it's very, very useful. Most of them run on this mechanic called victory points, which is just sort of a generic term, and most of the subsystems will rename it to something. But it's a very, very useful tool. It's very simple to implement, not complicated, but the ways that you can use it are vast and varied and can make for a number of different sort of alternative resources to gather, or in some cases try to prevent from piling up. So I just want to sort of go down the list there. I don't want to get too deep into any of them. The chase and heist alone I could talk for hours about. It's a very fun mechanic. I will say that the chase system especially is something that, I think the most similar thing I saw was very similar when run either Sly Flourish or Angry DM, I can't recall, years ago. It's a chase system that I've used pretty exclusively for any high tension chase scenes that I've had to run where the real focus of the story was not on combat or anything like that, but just keeping pace, catching up. It's a very exciting system and something that you really should check out. This whole section of subsystems is something that absolutely any table, any DM can get use out of. A lot of this stuff in here is specifically about running Pathfinder 2nd Edition, and while these rules are set up for Pathfinder 2nd Edition, there is nothing about them that makes them not able to be applied to anything from 5th Edition to Fate to any other number of games. It really is a wonderful tool. This section alone, even if you don't play Pathfinder 2nd Edition, is worth picking this book up for. It's going to have very system agnostic rules in it. I'll just sort of go down the list of the types of alternative encounter and challenges that these victory points and these subsystems can cover. There's rules for how to use those victory points for tracking influence, if you're just trying to gain favor or convince a powerful entity, or whether it's a person or a jury or a dragon, whatever. It's about making an argument, about just gathering and focusing your influence and how you can affect people without having to resort to magic and swords. It's also going to cover if you have to research things, and that's going to be a lot more than just rolling lore checks or arcana checks. It's going to be going in and just setting up whether it's a library or a laboratory or whatever it may be. Different ways that all sorts of characters, regardless of their skill focus, can contribute along a track of finding out the information that you need, instead of just being, oh, we've got to find out about this shady organization, somebody roll one society check and we're good. No, this gets a little more deep and a little more in depth in terms of making that a little more dramatic and making it something that isn't just hand waved away with a single check and we move on. And it's going to help you track reputation as well. So maybe there are multiple factions, and maybe some of them like you, some of them don't, and just gives you guidelines for having your players interacting with a number of organizations or a number of settlements that have different things they appreciate based on the players' deeds, their actions, and their attitudes. What sort of boons and what sort of grudges might develop from there. These are all really nice social and non-combat directly related systems that will add a lot to a game, especially an intrigue-based game, something where the biggest threats are not fire-breathing dragons, but bureaucrats or red tape, things like that. I sort of touched on chases already. Along those same lines are infiltrations. Now this is everything from your heists to your hostage situations or whatever it may be, where you've got to get in somewhere quickly and quietly and make as little disturbance as possible. It's got everything from doing your homework and planning ahead to improvising in the moment with the idea of things that you did before you went in, allowing you some leeway once you're inside, whether that's things like disguises that you've made or bribes that you've greased palms with, whatever it may be. But it also gets into tracking your progress along each obstacle that you face versus the progress bar of all the people that are trying to keep you out of this location, and how they begin to figure out that someone is there, someone is coming in, or otherwise becoming a security threat that things need to heighten in order to catch. Finally, it covers a few other things that don't really fit into any hard categories. They're all pretty unique. One of them is leadership, something that a lot of people really like. I've always tried to avoid it just because it can be a little bit clunky. This version of it, I kind of like a bit better than some other versions that I've seen. It's a lot simpler, and it seems, at least for now, like it's going to be a lot harder for the players to game that system and get some unintended or maybe disproportionate rewards for exploring that side of things. Whether it's creating their own adventuring guild or business, whether it's starting a city, and I'm sure we'll see some of these rules expanded on in the Kingmaker Adventure Path that's coming to 2nd edition. Very excited about that. But it seems a really interesting game mechanic that is something I think my players, and at least my online game, are going to want to explore. It also is going to cover duels, both swordplay and magical, giving the players some unique reactions and ways to use skills that, in a more frantic and hectic, less structured, combat scenario, they may not have access to, but in something that is regulated like a duel, they might, they get some abilities that they can't leverage in other scenarios. It's pretty interesting. I certainly might like to see it expanded on a little more, but maybe it's robust enough when we play through it. I definitely think it's worth a try, and as somebody with a swashbuckler in one of their games, I'm sure it's going to come up. There's also some rules for vehicles, both how you interact with them, whether it's piloting or boarding them, and actual vehicle-to-vehicle combat, whether it's against a vehicle directly or maybe just running down foes with your wagon. There's some stats in there for some vehicles, from carts and boats to airships, and a pretty nasty golem or mech type figure. So that's pretty exciting and pretty fun. I certainly would have liked to have seen some more vehicles statted out. But with what we have there, you can certainly extrapolate and build your own. It's not terribly limiting. I will say this: where is the gunpowder? Where's the black powder? Where are the cannons? You give me stats for a ship and no cannon stats? I'm antsy for it. Especially, Gunslinger isn't out yet, and no cannons. I wonder when the reveal is going to be, because it's got to be coming. We know it's going to show up, but I think that they're just baiting us along, making us wait, and I'm hoping that that pays off and that it's as good as the anticipation is building it up to be. So hopefully, they've said that we probably won't see it in the advanced player's guide, which broke my heart, but maybe we'll see it soon, I hope. And one more thing is Hexploration. If you're not familiar, it's basically not quite randomly generated worlds, although I guess you could use it to randomly generate wildernesses and things like that, especially in a sandbox game. But it's also just a nice tool to add a more structured and a little more unpredictable element to exploration over large areas. It's something that I've never used. I can certainly think of some campaigns I'd like to run where it would be very useful, but so far in my DMing career, I've never really had a need for that sort of random generated massive expanses, but it is intriguing, and I know that a lot of people have used it in other systems and in the past, and it's a pretty popular tool. So rules for that are in here, so if that's something you've been waiting for, you're good. So the next section of the book is all about variant rules, and this is something that I personally have been extremely excited about. As a hardcore homebrewer, being able to see ways, pre-built ways to tweak the game and get, more importantly for me, get feedback on what the developers say you might need to adjust if you make these adjustments, really helps me to sort of see the nuts and bolts of the system even more. It's a pretty straightforward system. It's very elegant in its simplicity. The modular way that the system works allows for a lot of changes that don't necessarily have to affect anything else. But that just made it all the more interesting when you see the ways that some of these changes that they recommend you adjust the system elsewhere to accommodate them. But beyond that, just the variant rules themselves are pretty interesting. Overall, I don't think that I would want to mess too much with second edition, and those who have known me for a long time will know that's a huge compliment to second edition. I've built my own game systems, dozens of them probably by this point. Even when I'm playing a pre-existing game system, I'm almost always tweaking, changing things, sometimes a little second edition so far, just a little, sometimes a whole lot. But it is very, very nice to have all these options that are there that I can just go to and grab for certain, either whether they're one-shots or just really specific campaign settings where I want to do something a little bit different outside the norm. Like I said, for the most part, these are things that I would not implement de facto on my games, but you might really be interested in a lot of these. I just happen to really like second edition as is and don't need most of these sweeping changes. That doesn't mean they aren't interesting. It doesn't mean there aren't some of them that I really am checking out and considering for other things. So let's just sort of get to the list of what you can expect in those variant rules. Again, I can't go deep into those. There's going to be so much. Each one of them, or some of them, each one could be their own video, and maybe you'd like that. But it's a lot, and I certainly would love to discuss it in the comments. But to take the time to go in on each and every one would be a very long video. But if there is something you want us to expand on, definitely down in the comments, let us know, and I can definitely go a little bit deeper on something, either in a response in your comment, or if we get enough demand, dive into it in a separate video. So the variant systems, let's just sort of run down what you can expect from these. They go over a couple of alternative ability score options. These are things that I personally don't see much use for. The core rulebook does talk about rolling stats. This goes into point buy, as well as a different pacing for the standard ability score increases. For the most part, I cannot see myself ever wanting to use a different ability score system outside of a one-shot ever again in my whole life. I just think that there's something really simple, and it just makes a lot of sense the way that the choices you make about your character directly influence their statistics. You know, the way that a blacksmith is going to get the strength, combined with, your ancestry bonuses and then your class giving you a final little boost, as well as the 4 boosts just to, sort of create miscellaneous factors of your character, or just, fill in whatever gaps you need. It just makes a lot of sense. And it is very satisfying to build a character where, you know what to expect in terms of what your best and worst scores are going to be, and you are in total control pretty much over how that gets factored in. While random generated stats are really fun, and I used to use them all the time just because I liked that organic feel, this, for me, has that same organic feel for the reasons I've already mentioned, while also giving you a lot of control, again, over how your character is going to play. Something that some people may not like, but for me, I want my players to feel like they get to be competent in the things that are important to them as players and important to their characters as well. With that said, by all means, enjoy the point buy, enjoy the alternative pacing of those ability scores, whatever you're into. None of these, just because I don't enjoy some of these, or just because I do enjoy some of these, don't take my word on it. Definitely dive in and check these out for yourself, because our tastes are going to vary a whole lot. What's important to me as a GM and as a player will not be important to you as a GM or player. And same for our tables. So it's going to be very different. So, I'm going to sort of tell you how I feel about these, but that does not mean that you should not, you should not ever take what I say as gospel. Definitely check on it yourself, especially with all these new tools that are coming in, and all the fun stuff in this book, especially. So much of it's going to come down to preference and play style. So definitely give it a run through and check it out. One thing that I do like, while I'm not crazy about the ability scores, is the alignment options. I do like the alignment system as it currently is. I know a lot of people aren't crazy about it. For one, I like those sort of black and white characters, those almost archetypical. Those archetypes where, this character's good, this character's evil. With that said, there are a number of times when I feel constrained and frustrated in that system, and I know a lot of people just, can't really justify using it at all. And that's fine. This gives you some alternative rules from completely removing alignment, which, is something that's going to require a lot of other changes, things you might not think about, but things like the way a lot of spells and magical effects function, as well as increasing some difficulties in some scenarios. It's definitely something that you can combat, that you can make up for, and they kind of give you hints on how to do that. One of the ones that I liked the best in here was the idea that there's a track of good and evil and a track of law and chaos, with neutrality in the middle, and 7 points along that track with true neutral, and then true good, true evil, or true neutral, and then pure good, pure evil, and a few steps in between, and same with law and chaos. That's very handy and very useful, and something that I think most people, even if they don't like traditional alignment, can sort of get around, because that allows for a little more gray area. And it allows you to not have to change too much about the system, because you can still acknowledge that somebody who fits maybe the very last, or the last two on those tracks might be susceptible to the magical effects related to that alignment, while leaving plenty of room in the middle for your players that want to, be selfish and a bit harsh, but not necessarily evil. There's just things like that. There's also an alternative where only demons and celestials have extreme enough alignments for them to matter, and everyone else is just doing their best, whatever that looks like. That one's a pretty fun one. Again, it's going to require a lot of changes throughout the system versus that track one that I like, but it's certainly something you should explore if that's what you're into. The others that they have, I think, are very interesting and something that I would probably implement in any game, even if I'm keeping regular alignment as well. And that is this idea of stated ideals and beliefs and things that are important to you. And the idea that, I will always stand up for my king and country, for example, being something that, while you're not necessarily good, you adhere to that. And I think that there's something really interesting in that, something that every table could benefit by having your players write down 2 or 3 things, just firm stances and statements, even if you're not changing the rest of the alignment. That's something that Mouse Guard has in it, and something that like Fate and a lot of other systems will just have you declare like creeds and mottos and things about your character, and use that sort of as not so much a morality system, but a way to inform decisions and about what type of character you are. So I think it's really interesting and worth checking out. The next thing I'm pretty excited about are deep backgrounds, and that's just a series of tables that you can either roll on or choose from depending on what you prefer, where your players get to go through and sort of create their own background, again either random or by selection, and it can feel a lot more organic and a lot better. I mean, we've all so far had players come and say, I really like this background, but these ability scores don't do anything for me, but everything else about it I love, and things like that. This would allow you to go through and help them create a background all their own, or for truly random games, just roll dice and see what comes up. One thing that's really cool about that is part of that background system, and this is something that even if you don't intend to change your backgrounds necessarily, is still something you could use at your table, is this idea of each player picks a person to their left and rolls a relationship dice and says, okay, we went to school together and we helped each other a lot in whatever class, and then the person maybe to your right, you roll and you get a complicated relationship, like he accused me of stealing once we were kids, turns out I didn't do it, and that's a really fun way to get players to connect their backstories together. It's something that your table may not need. Maybe your players already do that, or maybe you don't always like to run those kind of campaigns where everybody's got a pre-existing relationship, which is the classic you all meet at an inn sort of thing. But it's definitely something that I think can be a lot of fun for a lot of campaigns and a lot of tables to both, just along with the way that background and alignment and things like that already inform newer players, especially how they might want to play a character. I think though creating those relationships at random, the way real life relationships often are created, can allow a pretty organic way to make the players feel connected to each other and care a little more, or maybe a little less, about the characters in the party, and can lead to some dynamic interactions. Another thing I really like are the level 0 rules. I love the idea of not right for every campaign, of course, but the idea of having characters that either are just random townsfolk, or maybe have apprenticed a little bit in, either as a guard, or maybe like a hedge wizard sort of thing. These characters that have little or almost no knowledge in adventuring and no skill or experience, who can go on and have this sort of fight that wouldn't be much of a challenge to even first level adventurers, but feels so much more visceral and real when you're just when you're just Agnes the farmer's daughter and Hank the baker's son. Like, it's pretty fun to throw players into that, especially if it's sort of a one-shot and then maybe years later again they meet. Now we fast forward and now they're all actual characters with class levels and things like that. And there are rules for them being just total commoners to being people who have dabbled a little bit, and you can see what they're going to eventually become once they get more experience, whether that's knowing 1 or 2 cantrips or being proficient with 1 or 2 melee weapons or a type of armor. So it's really a pretty interesting way to start a long-term campaign, or even just as a little prologue to another campaign. It can be a lot of fun. It's something that I'm probably going to use in my next campaign. We'll see. Beyond that, they get into some variants for magic items. These are things that you're probably expecting. Both the sort of almost removal of magic items, and then allowing players' stats to progress based on level instead of getting items, and that includes everything from like potency and striking rune type bonuses to even some skill boosts and things like that. For if you want to play a game with little to no magic items being dropped, but you don't want your players, you don't want to have to readjust all the math and all the encounter tables and things like that, you can have characters that can keep up for the most part with characters in a magic campaign, so you don't have to restat that dragon or that, whatever it may be. There's also an option in there to remove level when you're calculating proficiency bonus. That's something that we've known was coming. They've talked a lot about that. It's something that I'm pretty intrigued by. Not that I dislike adding level to checks and proficiencies, but I do think there's some value to keeping those numbers looking a little more manageable, and also that appeal that 5th edition does have, where maybe some monsters can feel like a challenge in a wider range of levels than in the default. With that said, I don't think I would want to change that all the time, but certainly for certain types of stories, removing level from proficiency could be really, really interesting. But when you do that, you do miss out on that sort of epic feeling of monsters that a few levels ago really challenged us, or things that we can mow down right now. And so, it's about what type of story you want to tell, certainly. But I do think it's pretty interesting in a pretty nice way. And one that, while it will cause some adjustments, because everything is so built on these similar numbers with these proficiencies, whether it's attacks or saves, skill checks, and class DCs, it's something that you can change without having to change a whole lot. Certainly there are considerations, and they go over that, but it's a pretty easy one to implement if you just want to keep those numbers low, either for simpler math, or, as I said, so that you can introduce so you can keep certain monster types a threat in a wider range of levels. But just be advised that monsters that are 5 levels above may no longer be a truly terrifying threat to your players. Just like monsters that are 4 levels below will no longer be trivial. They might still be able to go toe-to-toe with a party, especially in numbers. There's no sending 30 goblins at a party of level 5 characters. They're probably going to die. And then finally, there's some changes to skill points. This is one that I'm really not seeing the appeal on, which is surprising. I would have thought 6 months ago, before I dove into 2nd edition, I was really on the fence about the whole concept of the proficiency bonus. I didn't really like how 5th edition handled it. Just being this sort of flat bonus to everything that you do. But 2nd edition is so different, where you have the different tiers of proficiency so that you can show, yes, I'm more invested in this skill or this ability than I am in this one. So I really like that a little bit more granular nature of it. So going back to a more classic skill point sort of system does not interest me. Especially this implementation where getting something to legendary, you have to sort of save up skill points to be able to purchase that next rank. It's definitely not if you're thinking of like 3.0, 3.5, where you just get a number of points to put wherever you want. It sort of is like that, but it costs more and more to rank up, and you're not going with with a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, up and up. You're still going with those proficiency levels per the core. It's just how you level those up is different. So where's the value, you may be asking? The primary value is that you can have significantly more skills get to master at the cost of fewer skills getting to legendary, or you could even have a character that only has 2 or 3 legendary skills and not even trained in anything else. Certainly interesting, but not something that I personally see needing. But again, if it's something that interests you, you have it at your disposal. Finally, there's a change that I am very on the fence about. I like it in theory, and I think I would even enjoy it a lot in practice, and that is the stamina system. What that does is it splits your character's HP in 2. So you still have an HP, which is your character's actual health. Are they bleeding out? Have they taken a significant blow to the head? But they also have stamina, which is depleted as the idea is they're like dodging what might otherwise be lethal blows. And your stamina depletes first, and then your HP depletes after. And then after fights, it's really easy to regain that stamina, whereas that HP stays somewhat difficult. Second edition, not very, honestly, with all the different myriad ways that you can increase HP. But for certain types of games where you don't have a dedicated healer, or you want to play something where there's even less need for magic or no magic at all, for example, like gritty Conan type setting, going to that stamina system where you don't have that suspension of disbelief. If I just took an axe to the face and I'm still standing, now the stamina has allowed me to dodge it, but I'm getting tired. And then the idea that you don't have that in combat healing. So as your stamina depletes, but your HP is the much more important one because it's harder to replace. So you have these scenarios where you've got to manage those 2 stats, and it even opens up like some morale type situations where a high charisma character can give you can talk you up and get some of that stamina back, like a rally sort of thing. And all this is really cool and really interesting, but I also think that it doesn't necessarily add anything to the game. It's something that I would definitely use if I was playing with all crunchy friends that all really liked the numbers and the math. I think it's a little bit more dynamic and adds a little extra layer of strategy as you consider like that extra layer of depth in the stamina and HP. I really enjoy it. I just don't think it's worth adding to the game. It's a complication that outside of very specific campaigns or table styles isn't necessary, and it hurts me because I want to play it so bad. I just can't justify making all my players relearn those few little intricacies. As simple as they would be to implement, maybe, it's just a needless complication and creating 2 numbers to track instead of 1. And I just can't justify it. But again, maybe your table can. Maybe you and your players would really like it. And it's there for you if you do. So one thing I want to just sort of talk about is, and they mention it a bit in the book, that you might be at a table where either everybody's new, or people are coming from simpler game systems, and they find all the choices and all the options in the 2nd edition Pathfinder to be a little bit much, maybe overwhelming, or maybe they just don't feel the need to get super in depth with character customization and options and things. And so there are a lot of options in here to cut down on some of that crunch and some of those choices, and really make it so that you're making fewer choices. You're still going to be taking a lot of class feats and things like that, but you're going to be able to, by reducing those that proficiency to level. There's options in there to completely remove skill feats and to minimize ancestry. There's some alternative ancestry rules in there where you might get a little bit of bonus at the beginning for your ancestry, but then nothing else going forward. And there's just a lot of ways that you can reduce the options that a character has. without necessarily changing the power level of the characters, so you don't have to adjust too much in terms of the monsters and the scenarios that they're able to overcome. But it's something that doesn't interest me or my group, but it's something that if you're having a hard time selling people on the game because they've heard that Pathfinder 1 was really crunchy and now they're scared about Pathfinder 2, or just people that just want that just aren't interested in the customization, you can use those alternate rules to maybe just for a one shot, or maybe for a long-term campaign even, to simplify, keep those numbers from getting bigger and bigger, keep players from feeling like they're just bogged down and overwhelmed with choices. Again, these are things that I'm not interested in and my table's not interested in, but it may be good for you and your table and your players and what they like. And it may just be good for quicker ways to introduce people to the game and get them hooked on some of the other mechanics, and then let them deep dive on creating their own character once you've actually got them snagged on the system. One more thing in these variants that I want to talk about. I'm sure some of you noticed that I didn't talk about it earlier. I was just really sort of saving the biggest piece for last, and that is dual class characters. If you're not familiar, and the term is sometimes that people use a lot, is Gestalt or Gestalt. I've only ever seen it written. But so these Gestalt, these dual class characters, basically take the better of their two classes anytime a number comes up, whether it's like if you have a wizard and a fighter, you're going to take the better of the two defenses, you're going to take the better of the two attacks, you're going to take the better of the two proficiency bonuses on saving throws, health points, all that. And it's very cool. The ability to have a character who is progressing fully and simultaneously as a paladin and a sorcerer is awesome. It's something that can allow for some really unique combinations and really cool characters. And it's something that a lot of people at least once give a shot. Maybe just like we're going to be really powerful characters for 1 or 2 levels, or maybe even a full campaign, just to see what it's like to have that much power. One thing I will say, and the book makes clear, is be careful about combining martial classes. It can lead to things like a fighter and all the fighter's ability to hit and control an opponent, combined with a barbarian's ability to output insane amounts of damage, and then the fighter's high defenses with the barbarian's extra layer of toughness with their resistances and their temporary HP. You can really create a character that has doubled down on one style of play and is very difficult to do anything about. The book recommends that anytime if you do play this dual class system, that what you do is you try to make sure that you are only having characters combine classes that don't fill the same role. So, like an alchemist and a rogue together could be really cool. And, maybe a wizard and a cleric could be really cool. But that ranger / fighter is just going to be fairly well busted. They want you to focus on building interesting, complex characters with new options rather than characters that are funneled in, doubled up on one style of play. Now, the interesting thing about this is that they really only recommend you alter the challenge rating that these types of players, these dual class characters, can face by 1. Their logic there is that none of the maximum numbers have gotten any higher. That really what this is doing is just extending the workday for the characters by giving them more spell slots, or more tools outside of limited per use abilities. It's giving them on average better saves and better HP, but overall they're still not going to have a better chance to succeed on any checks than a party that just happened to feature both of those classes. So it only recommends you alter their the level that they're fighting at by 1. I'm sure if you had a party of just marshals stacked on top of each other, that might change. You might need to adjust a little bit further. But I think it's a pretty interesting thing, and something that I definitely think that my players and I might explore at some point in the future. One other thing to talk about is, and something that we've talked about in previous videos, is adding in free archetypes or discount dedications, as it may be, either all for the same, like the classic example even in here is if you have like a whole party where the whole game is pirate campaign, give everybody a pirate archetype. If you want to hook everybody into other aspects of the world, then maybe you could all live in the same city, and while you all work together in one facet as adventurers, you all also have ties to several different organizations throughout the city. And that could be certainly just represented in roleplay, but it makes the characters and the players feel a little more in-world when you give a mechanical boost, when you actually give them those dedication feats. So they have something not just to point to on a list of traits and say, oh, I know these guys, but you can actually say, okay, I'm actually ingrained in the Grey Maidens, or whatever your organization is. I'm a member, I have certain benefits, and I have certain acquaintances, and I have certain goals that may not always align with the party or with other people here, but are things that I have to keep in mind when I'm playing my character beyond just, this is our goal right now. I also have these little sub-goals because of who I know and because of who I work for. And that is super fun, super cool, and something that I don't see myself playing many campaigns in the future where that isn't something that I give my players the option for. I think it's just a super interesting way to hook them in, and a great way to make the world feel more real and more alive, and add a little bit of extra depth and possible conflict to a party dynamic without it being something as dramatic as, I'm a party mole and I'm going to kill the party. It's something where, yeah, okay, we all agree we have to go get the MacGuffin, but we might disagree on what we do once we have it. And that's really fun and interesting and a great thing to add to your game. The last section of the book is something that you may not think you're going to need, especially if you're a real creative type. It's an NPC gallery. It's a big list of NPCs that you can drop into your game without having to do work of building them or designing them. It's really nice because there's not a lot of humanoid enemies in the bestiary. So having these is a wonderful tool to fill out monster groups with things besides just reskinning a gnoll or a hobgoblin. And it's got 83 NPCs in almost 20, I think 18 categories. Whether it's courtiers, criminals, villains, doctors, healers, all sorts of different classifications. And some of them have specialties. That is where certain characters may have abilities that far exceed their overall level. So a level 2, the example they use is like a level 2 baker may just be a level 2 baker, but if for whatever reason you decide to have a bake-off with that baker, he's going to be cooking at a 7th level scale. So, don't just assume that because you've got, expert in crafting as a level 4 character that you can match the master baker in town. It's a really interesting thing, and they have not just the rules for those 83 NPCs, but also ways that you can create those specialists, those characters that either have larger bonuses or special abilities related to specific fields. Typically, those are not combat fields. The idea is not to throw your level 3 characters at a bunch of also level 3 monster NPCs, whatever, but secretly they all shoot bows as if they're 9th level. That's not what it's about. All of these NPCs are represented as humans, but there are some little templates you can add to apply them and create characters of any of the core races, core ancestries from the core rulebook. So it's a massive number of potential characters, especially if you factor in the elite and weak templates. I'm sure we'll continue to get more templates when the next bestiary comes out. What that means is you have, I don't know, a couple hundred at least potential NPCs in this book that can fill a number of roles at a number of different levels. Whether it's a simple bar fight or some brigands you encounter on the road, whatever it may be. It's a really, really, really nice tool that you don't have to create these things by hand anymore, and it fills in all the gaps left in the bestiary in terms of humanoid enemies. So, top-notch, great decision there. I will say that none of those characters get into double digits for level as far as I can recall, and the elite template will help out a little bit, but just one level. So for really powerful major villains that are humanoids, you still will need to probably build them or just reskin an appropriate monster from the book, from the bestiary. But it's a really nice tool. One more thing about that NPC, the NPC gallery, is there's a little sneak peek at the evil champions that we're going to see in the Advanced Player's Guide. We have a sample villain who is a 5th level chaotic evil paladin. So you get to see the special reaction and the focus spell that comes with those tenets and all that. And it's pretty interesting. I'm excited to see the other reactions. And it was just a nice little surprise in there when I got to it. So in closing, I love those subsystems in there. It's something that, again, even if you're not playing 2nd edition, you really should check out. They can really add some drama to some things that might otherwise have just been a skill check or two, and make things like research a lot more engaging. The NPC gallery is a luxury I never knew I needed, but I'm really, really happy to have it. Something that I certainly could do without, but it's just wonderful to have. All the variant rules, some of them I really like, some of them I do want to use. For the most part, I don't think there's anything wrong with 2nd edition, but there are certainly some nice divergences in there for either specific campaign settings or just fun one-shots where you want to try something strange out. And again, for me as a homebrewer, it's really nice to see some of the ways that they recommend, places they recommend you look when you change this thing over here. Most of them are pretty straightforward, things that I'd expected, but it's nice for them to lay out problem areas you may encounter when editing certain systems within the game. Overall, I love this book. I am extremely pleased to have it, and I have not even begun to really dive into all that's there, because there is so much, especially in the homebrew creation systems of making cities and towns and the different hazards and things. There's a lot there to use and a lot there to benefit from, both if you're a home brewer and if you're just somebody who wants to put a little bit of a twist on something. You don't normally think of yourself as somebody who changes the system by and large, but even things like editing traps or making custom items for your players, little minor tweaks like that don't affect the whole system, this book has it in there for you. It also, like I said, goes deeper into the different modes of play and gives you some guidelines and things there that you're going to find beneficial, even if you're a veteran. It's a new system, and there's some things that we could all refresh on, even if we've been playing for a long time and running for a long time. And definitely some aspects of the new system that you might not have, not necessarily not have grasped, but not fully appreciate. That it really breaks down and gives recommendations for. So, this book is awesome. Very happy to have it, and just making me, that little tease of that champion is really making me look forward to that Advanced Player's Guide that's coming soon. So, thanks so much for watching this. I know this is a bit long, but there was a lot to cover. If you do have anything you have specific questions about, definitely let us know down in the comments. If there's a variant rule you're super excited about, or you think that maybe I should reconsider in my first assessment of, definitely let me know. And if there is anything else you're curious about, do let us know. Thank you so much for watching. Welcome to the Collective, and we'll see you next time.